Today, I want to talk about the problem of cascading slicers in Power BI. So, what are cascading slicers, you may ask? Well, they're a feature that allows you to link one slicer's selection to another slicer. Sounds handy, right? But here's the issue we're facing with them. Now, let's dive into it and explore the trouble we're encountering. I've got the training dataset from the master class here, and I'm going to use it to create a straightforward visualization. This way, we can get a clear picture of what exactly the problem is. So, let's get started and see what's going on. So let's work on this together. If we take the customer country from the orders table and use it as a slicer, we can create a bar chart to visualize the data. That way, we won't need a map, and it'll be much more straightforward to analyze the information. To make this happen, we'll need a measure, right? So, I'm going to head over to the measures table and grab the total sales measure. We'll use this measure to represent the data in the bar chart and gain valuable insights. I'll place the option to see all the countries and the total sales right in the middle of the dashboard. And you know what? I think it'd be great to add data labels too. That way, we can easily see how the data changes based on the slicers we apply. Now, let's head over to the suppliers table. Ah, there it is. Now I want to use my suppliers data here. We can analyze how different suppliers are performing and how their numbers stack up. With this setup, we'll have a much clearer picture of everything. When I go to the supplier name section, the default option gives us a list of suppliers right here. But you know what's cool? I can switch it to a slicer. Now, the report consumer has the power to choose different supplier names from this slicer. Depending on the supplier they pick, the data in the orders table will dynamically change. For example, let's say I click on this one and tick the option. Watch what happens, the data in this section will update accordingly. It's like magic. This way, the consumers can dive into specific suppliers and see how they're doing in the blink of an eye. All I need to do is untick this option. But here's a nifty trick. If I hold down the Control key, I can select several of them at once. So, if I want to compare a bunch of suppliers together, I've got the flexibility to do that too. By the way, there's another option you might like. If you prefer a drop-down list instead of the current slicer style, no problem. Just click on the little down arrow here. You can switch to a drop-down. It's all about making things work best for you. Also, I want to point out a cool feature in Power BI settings. You can add a play button. It's like we're taking this to the next level. Let me go to the list view. That'll make it easier to see everything. Oh, and I'll increase the text size a bit, making it more user-friendly. Alright, here in the formatting section, I'll go to Items and choose a text size of 15. That should do the trick. So, now we have the power to choose suppliers and filter our data on the fly. But hold on, I don't want any visual overlapping issues, so let's make this section a tad smaller, just to keep things clean and tidy. The reason why this setup works so smoothly is actually pretty straightforward. If we take a look at our data model here, you'll notice we've got a star schema going on. And guess what? We've established a one-to-many relationship from the suppliers table to the orders table. It's like a well-connected web. So now, I can choose any of the columns from the suppliers table and use them as filters and slicers. Cool, right? These slicers allow me to filter the data from the orders table, and in this case, we've got the customer country right here. Plus, the total sales we're seeing are derived from the sales column in the orders table. It's like these connections bring everything together and give us the power to analyze and slice our data any way we want. That's the way it works. Always remember, the default filter direction is from the one side to the star, or the many sides. See that little arrow there? It highlights the flow. Now, moving on to the next step, let's add another slicer, but this time from the dates table. All right, back to our report, and here's the dates table. So, let's choose a specific date, say this one. Perfect. We want to use this as a slicer to further refine our data. Instead of using a table, I chose to add a slicer. You know, for that cool interactive feel. Now, let's decide if we want to have a hierarchy here. It's all about customization. All right, right-clicking on the date field, I selected Add as a hierarchy to make it easier to navigate. Now we've got a slider for the dates, sweet. But, hold up, it looks a bit big, so let's make it small. Clicking on this icon, I chose the smaller size option. Perfect. Now, we've got our neat little slider here. Sure, the numbers might be a tad small, but don't worry, I'll guide you through, step by step. If anything's unclear, just follow my lead, and we'll make it work. Now, what I want to do is select a specific date range. Let's go with this example. I'll pick the 30th of August in 2020. See how the data changes as soon as I select that range? It's like magic. All right, let's make this section a bit smaller too, for that cleaner look. Now, imagine the report consumer getting their hands on this. They can choose any period they want. Let's say they go for September instead. The data will adjust accordingly. We've got that flexibility, and it's all so easy to navigate and explore. Now, let's switch to the 6th of September in 2020. Look at that, the data's much smaller now because we've narrowed down our time frame. All right, now I'll pick one of our suppliers, going with this first one here. And bam! There's the data right in front of us. Sure, it's not much, but at least this supplier provided items that we sold to Sweden during that time. It's like we're zooming in and seeing the nitty-gritty details. I see the problem here. So, we've filtered the dates table to focus on a very specific window of time. On the other hand, we also have another slicer that considers suppliers. However, there's an issue with some of the suppliers. If we include them, there won't be any data visible in the view. The reason for this is quite simple. There's no combination of sales that occurred within this narrow time frame with a supplier, such as Bigfoot Breweries, that provided any supplies to us which we have sold. Essentially, there's no matching data for that particular supplier within this specific time frame. I see what you're referring to, and you're right. The supplier table doesn't seem to be filtered. While we chose to apply a filter to the dates table, the suppliers table, being used as a slicer, still displays all its values. This is precisely what I meant earlier when I mentioned the cascading slicer problem or filter problem. To investigate this further, we can simply navigate to the model view once again and examine the model in more detail. In our case, this is the example model we use. But, of course, if you apply this to your own data, then it'll behave exactly the same. The problem we face is in our star schema, specifically the dimension tables, which are the tables on top, on the one side. Those filter the facts table, which is the order table right here. However, they do not filter each other. Let's say, if I select something from the dates table here, it will filter the orders table, but it will not filter the suppliers table. The same is true for the employees table, for instance, or the other way around with the suppliers table. It can indeed filter the orders table, but by default, at least the dates table cannot filter in the opposite direction. This is because the relationship is from one side to the many side and not from the many side back to the one side of the dates table. Now, of course, some might argue that we can make this relationship bidirectional, allowing the filter direction to be from the many side to the one side as well. This way, we can have more flexibility in how the tables interact with each other. Enabling bidirectional relationships is something you want to avoid as much as possible. If you have a specific use case that necessitates bidirectional relationships, then go ahead and implement it. However, if you don't really need it, it's best to steer clear of it. The reason being, when you have a complex model and enable bidirectional relationships, Power BI might give you incorrect results depending on how you filter and slice and dice the data. It can lead to confusion and inaccurate analysis, which we definitely want to avoid. So, it's essential to carefully consider your model's requirements and design to ensure accurate and reliable data analysis in Power BI. When dealing with bidirectional relationships, you must exercise caution. Now, let me introduce you to a better solution. We are aware that the supplies table filters only the orders table, and the same applies to the dates table. For instance, the dates table can only filter the orders table, not the smallest table, and vice versa. However, there's a neat trick we can use to achieve the desired outcome, a custom measure to create a filter between the dimension tables. This approach will make the process work seamlessly. Let's head back to our report view. Now, what we need to do is create a measure that checks whether there's any data in the orders table corresponding to the specific supplier based on the current filter in our report view. To do this, we'll right-click on the Measures table, then select New Measure. Of course, you could also create the measure from the ribbon section if you prefer. However, I'll go ahead and do it directly here, so the measure appears neatly within our Measures table. So, there it is, just like that. Let's name this measure Filter Measure. The formula for this measure is relatively short, as our primary goal at the moment is to check whether there is any data in the orders table for this particular supplier, considering the current filter selection we have for the dates. So, filter measure it is, and the formula will be straightforward for this purpose. To achieve this, we will use the isempty function, which serves the purpose of checking whether the specified table or table expression is empty. It's a pretty handy function for this scenario. So, we just need to provide it with the table we want to check, which in this case is the orders table. All we need to do is type in orders table, represented as order TDL, and then close the parentheses. That's it. We now have our filter measure up and running. Let's go ahead and execute the filter measure. As expected, it will give us either true or false, as it is a measure. Let's quickly check the results. We'll go here and choose Bigfoot Breweries, for example. When I select this option, we can observe that there's no data available. To get a clearer view, let's temporarily switch this visualization to a table. Now, we can see the supplier names, and indeed, the second entry here corresponds to Bigfoot Breweries. To get a better view, you've made the size bigger by avoiding 2, and now we can proceed to check the filter measure we just created. To do that, we'll simply check the box next to the filter measure and add it to the visual. Now, you can see that we have a mix of true and false values. For instance, Bigfoot Breweries shows as true, indicating that there is no data for this supplier. Similarly, Escargot, Novo, and others also show as true, indicating that there's no data for them in the orders table as per the current date filter. All the ones that return true in the filter measure are the suppliers who don't have any data in the sales table for the specific period we have currently selected. As an example, if you click on the one that also returns true, like you mentioned, you'll notice that there's no data available. Everything in that section will appear grayed out, indicating the absence of data for that particular supplier during the selected period. This way, you can easily identify suppliers with no corresponding data in the sales table for the current date filter. So on one hand, if I choose, let's say, this first option that specifically mentions forwards, I think I'll go with this one. As you can see here, the data is highlighted, but it's not completely filtered yet. You can actually change the way you interact with it. Just head over to the Format tab, and then click on Edit Interactions. After that, you'll find the option for filtering right here. When you do that, you'll notice the data gets filtered accordingly. When it's marked as false, it means there's data present, but if you take a look at one of the true ones, like exotic liquids, there won't be any data displayed. This measure allows us to determine whether we should display the supplier name or not. So, for the time being, I'll go ahead and remove the filter measure from the table because I want to switch it back to a slicer format. And there you go, we've got our slicer back. The plan now is to utilize the measure we've created and apply it as a filter for the slicer. This way, we can easily control whether the supplier name is shown or not just by adjusting the slicer settings. Now, to access the filter pane, if it's not visible to you, just click on this option right here to expand it. Once it's open, you'll need to select the visual you want to work with. In this case, it's the slicer. After selecting the slicer, you'll see the supply names listed, and this is where you can add any additional filters you need. When it comes to filtering supply names, it's relatively straightforward. You can either select a specific supplier from the list, or you can utilize other filtering options like top, end, basic, advanced, and so on. This gives you the flexibility to tailor the filtering exactly as you require. Let me show you what I've got here. As I mentioned earlier, go ahead and drag that filter measure right into the filter visual, just like this. Now, if you try to expand it, you'll notice it's not working as expected at the moment. The reason behind this is that the current output is a simple Boolean value, just true or false. But what we actually need is a number, like 1 or 0, so that it filters properly in this context. That's the key to getting it to work seamlessly here. You're on the right track. It's actually quite simple to achieve this. To convert those true and false values into 1s and 0s, we can just make a little tweak. First, let's remove the existing measure from the visual, just for now. Now, let's revisit the measure one more time. There we go. Now, what we'll do is wrap the whole measure within the integer function. This way, the integer function will take those true and false values from the measure and effortlessly turn them into 1s and 0s. So, 0 will represent false, and 1 will represent true. That's all there is to it. Now, let's go ahead and close that parenthesis to complete the modification. Now, it's time to execute the changes and see how it works. So, with the modified measure, let's drag and select the slicer right in this area. Next, we'll drag the filter measure once again into the filter pane. Voila! Now you'll notice something cool. We have the option to use is less, is greater, and other conditions, all thanks to the number output. Now, if we want to check for an exact match, we simply choose is exactly, and here you can just type in 0, which means it's false. And you're good to go. The filter will work smoothly with these numeric values, making it a breeze to handle the data. Let's see what happens when you click on Apply. Remember, initially, the Bigfoot breweries and the next two suppliers didn't return any data for the specific time frame we had filtered. Now, let's click Apply and observe the changes. As you can see, those suppliers that didn't have data for the filtered time frame have been removed from the filter. The supplier names that remain visible here are the ones that do have data available. Now, if you select the first one, you can see data, and the same goes for the second one, the third one, the fourth one, and so on. This filtering process ensures that only relevant and data-rich suppliers are displayed, providing a clearer and more informative view of your data. Now you can only select the suppliers that actually have data shown here either by you, as the report consumer, or by anyone else using this feature. The reverse is also true. If you switch from 0 to 1 and then click Apply, you'll see the Bigfoot breweries and others appearing. However, it's important to note that all of those suppliers will return no data down there. When you select this one option, you'll notice that nothing appears, and the same goes for the subsequent options. This is essentially how you can create these cascading slicers. In other words, one slicer can filter another slicer, even without having bidirectional relationship enabled in the model. This allows for effective filtering and organization of data in your reports. Let me first uncheck this option here, and then switch it back to 0. After clicking Apply, we have exactly what we want. I can just remove this from the view, and as a result, the end consumer of the report will get precisely what they want. They will be able to base their analysis on the dates table, which is now properly filtered according to their preferences. By selecting the appropriate option, you will only see the suppliers that are actually providing data and information. This way, you can avoid having the other visuals in the view show empty or no data, especially those that are dependent on your orders table. It helps streamline the report and ensures that the visuals display meaningful and relevant information, enhancing the overall user experience. Using this method is a much better option compared to relying on bidirectional filters. While bidirectional relationships do have specific use cases, it's often preferable to avoid them if possible. Now that you've learned this alternative approach, you have a way to prevent empty visuals after filtering various slicers. This helps to keep your reports more organized, focused, and presenting meaningful data to the end users, enhancing the overall effectiveness and clarity of the reports. This filtering logic can be applied the other way around as well. While we've currently demonstrated it for the supplier name, you can implement the same filter logic for all the other measures from the other dimension tables. This way, you can achieve a cohesive and comprehensive filtering system across various aspects of your data. So, as we wrap up this final video, we want to leave you with a message: keep spreading positivity, chasing your dreams, and embracing the beauty of life. Together, we can make the world a better place. See you in another video. Love and peace.